Welcome to this Gimp tutorial on compositing. So let's get started. In this one we're going to use this picture here. I'm going to drop it onto the Gimp workspace to open it. So we're going to take this lighter and we're going to create a new fresh background for it using the gradient tool in Gimp. First thing we need to do is we need to make a selection here, and then we're going to remove this background, and then from there we can create our new background. The first thing I need to do is choose which selection tool I'm going to use. So Gimp has a few selection tools which you'll find up here in the top left hand corner in the toolbar. Some are fine for selecting fixed shapes, but obviously this is not a fixed shape, so we need to figure out which is the best one. So I'm going to use the select by color for this, because in this case we have a red lighter on a grey background, so it should be easy to select by color. If we click once, it will make a selection for us. If we hold down the shift key, you get a little plus sign, and you can then make further selections based on color. Now in the selection menu there's a useful option, because if I go and select this, it may select some of the background, but I can come up here to my select menu and I can choose remove holes, and that will remove any holes that are inside my selected areas. So for instance, you see this is selected here. So I'm going to continue holding shift and make more selections. As long as I stick to the red, I should be okay. I can again go select and remove holes to select this area here. Holding shift again, and select this little highlight here, and down here, and then we can go again just to make sure there's no more holes, remove holes. Okay, so that's done a pretty good job with the initial selection. So to round it off, I'm going to grab the free select tool and select around the edges of the remaining grey part here. So we choose free select, and I'm going to zoom in to 100%. So I hit 1 on the keyboard. Space then will allow me to move. So holding space and just moving the mouse, and I can just start. So you need to remember when you use the selection tool to hold down the shift key, because we need to add to our selection, of course. If you don't hold down the selection key, it will, of course, make a new selection. So I hit enter on the keyboard then to join that, and I'm going to hold the space and then check further down. I'm going to just tidy up this edge. So again, holding shift, click, release, and just move down the side of the lighter. And then enter. Again, we're using the space, and again, I'm just going to clean this edge up. Okay, and if you have any jagged edges, you can hold Control. So I want to remove this part here. So I held Control, and that will remove from selection. Holding down the Control key and making your selection. So we can see here the mask on the right hand side looks pretty good. We can also feather our edges, so I can choose a feathering range for this selection. So it might be a bit high, so I'm going to have my feathering on. I think about 7 is enough for this. And now we want to mask out the background. So we're going to go down to our mask options here, select selection, and click add. And we now have our background is now removed. And I'm going to hit Control Shift and A to deselect. And then we can hit Shift Control J to view the whole image. Okay, so now we just have the lighter. So the next thing that I'm going to do is create a duplicate of this lighter, so we can for its reflection. So I'm just going to select the layer and then choose down here we have create duplicate layer. So we have the duplicate layer. And then in the tools menu, transform tools, then we can do a flip, and we want to flip this, of course, vertically. So we have vertical chosen over here in the tool options, and I just click and I drag down and it flips vertically. So that will create a nice reflection. So I go back to my move tool, so I can move this down. Of course, it needs to be underneath the other layer. So I need to take this, I need to drag it and just put it below the original layer. You can also use the arrow keys on your keyboard to move it as well. This appears to me that it has actually, I'm going to just go back a little bit because it looks like when I flipped it that it's flipped at a rather peculiar angle. So I go back to my transform tools and I'm going flip again, vertical. That looks better. So now I'm going to move it. So I'm going to take my move. You can hold shift down to get it to move further. I'm just going to drag this below my layer again. Make sure I have the layer selected. Okay, so now with that selected, I'm just going to turn that off for the moment while we create the background, so it won't be in the way. One thing that you can do with this is we can apply the mask. So if I right click here, we get an option. I'm right clicking on the mask and I'm going apply mask, because we'll need to apply another type of mask to that later. But I'm going to now work on my background. So I'm going to turn this one off. I'm going to create a brand new blank layer. So this will just be what I'll call the foreground. Turn my caps lock off. So foreground. Get my spelling correct. And okay. So now I have my foreground. So I'm going to use, I want the foreground to have a graduated look. So I'm going to use the gradient tool inside Gimp to do that, but I don't want it to cover the whole area. So initially I'm just going to go to my rectangle selection tool and I'm going to make a selection about here. Okay, and now I'm going to go to my tools and my paint tools and select my gradient tool. And I'm going to choose my color. So I need to choose a foreground color, which is going to be my light color. And then I'm going to choose my background color, which is going to be a slightly darker color. Now, this is one of the areas where Gimp is quite strong. So this is not the way around I wanted. So Gimp does have, indeed, it has a live gradient. So you see the gradient as you're making it. And this is a feature that is not yet in Photoshop. So if you're using Photoshop, you'll find that you don't have access to this live gradient option yet. It is in the beta at the moment, so it will be coming to Photoshop soon. But you can also add points to your gradient. So I can move these to change how my gradient behaves. I can add further points if I want. So you have all these really nice gradient options. So we're just going to settle on this. I'm happy with this. I'm going to hit enter. And then I'm going to, again, Shift Control A to remove my selection. So we're also going to use blur this background a little bit in a moment. But for the moment, we can just bring back my reflection layer. So we can bring this back. So for this layer, I want to add a mask in order to make the reflection look a little bit more realistic. So I'm going to add a mask to it. I'm going to add a white mask, so full opacity. Click OK. I'm going to, with my gradient tool still selected, I'm just going to default it back to black and white. And this is another great way that you can see. And again, I'm just doing this the wrong way around, so I should be starting at the bottom, but I'm just going to actually reverse my colors and start at the top. So this is another big advantage to having your live gradient, that I can see how my reflection looks, and in Photoshop when I'm doing this I have to keep going back and recreating my gradient because I don't have a live view of it. So I can get a live view here, and then I can come in and do further edits, so I can have it strong at the beginning. So I can create another point here on it, for instance, and let's say I want to move this down and I want to have another point here. So I want it strong at the beginning, so, and then to have a quickish fall off. Move that up. Also move this up. And we can leave it like that. I think that's okay. So I'm going to hit enter on the keyboard. So that's been added now to my mask. I had my mask selected when I was doing that, so you need to remember that. But I've added my selection now. So I'm going to add a backlight. So in order to add the backlight, I'm going to add another blank layer, and I call this my backlight. Hit enter, and I need to add this right at the back. For this I'm going to use, again, a gradient, but I'm going to use a different type of gradient. So at the moment we've got the shape on linear. We've got a number of different shapes here. I'm going to use a radial one for this. And I don't want my colors to be just black and white. I want them to be in the gray spectrum. Maybe because it's light, we need it to be a little bit lighter. That's a bit heavy, that gray. So from here then, again, okay, I want my light maybe to be not so dark in the center, so I can just switch these around and you can see it here. I'm just going to Control Z that, because I'm going to bring my backlight at the back, and just I wanted it to be a little bit whiter in the center. So I'm going to move these points up a little bit to kind of bring that focus in on our object. Yeah, that's okay now. So we'll leave it like this and hit enter. So now finally we want to just add a little depth of field to this background, because it's like a macro shot, a close-up shot. It's not so realistic that this line is quite sharp back here. So I select my foreground. So we're going to use this foreground layer. So I'm going to make a duplicate of this layer. And I'm going to go to Tools, Transform Tools, and just flip this layer. And then my Move tool, and just move it down here, and I'm going to turn it off. Select my foreground layer, go to Tools, Filters, Blur, Lens Blur, and then in Auxiliary I'm going to choose my foreground copy. So I turned up my radius, so I'm using this as like a map, because from white is 100% in focus, black is 100% out of focus. So it acts as a mask to kind of give us this feel of this depth of field look as we work our way backwards. So it sends everything out of blur, everything out of focus. So I'm using that foreground copy to do that, as reversed it around as a map to add my depth of field. So there you have it. That's a final image composited into a new background using the selection tools and the gradient tools in Gimp. So thank you for watching.